Emma had stopped believing in new beginnings years ago. The prairie stretched endlessly outside her window, vast and indifferent, just like the silence that filled her days. At 43, she'd grown accustomed to being invisible, the widow no one talked to except in pitying whispers at the general store. Her husband had died 7 winters past, leaving her nothing but debt and a small patch of land that barely yielded enough to survive. The town blamed her, quietly but certainly, for having no children to carry on his name, as if her womb's refusal was a moral failing, as if loneliness was a punishment she deserved. Bessie, her last dairy cow, was all that stood between Emma and complete destitution. The animal was old, her milk production dwindling, but she was something. She was survival. Until the day Caleb Stone rode into her yard on a horse as black as midnight. Emma had been pulling weeds from the pathetic vegetable garden when she heard the hoofbeats. She straightened slowly, one hand shading her eyes against the late afternoon sun. The man who dismounted was enormous, his shadow falling across her like a storm cloud. He removed his hat, revealing dark hair threaded with silver and eyes the color of winter steel. "Ma'am," he said, his voice deep and careful, "I'm looking for Emma Hartwell." She wiped her dirt-covered hands on her apron, suddenly aware of how she must look, worn and weathered as the land itself. "You found her." He studied her for a long moment, and Emma felt something unfamiliar stir under his gaze. Not pity. Something else. Assessment, perhaps, or recognition of a fellow survivor. "My name is Caleb Stone. I've come from Montana with a proposal." Emma almost laughed. Proposals didn't come to women like her. "I'm not interested in buying anything, Mr. Stone. As you can see, I have little enough as it is. I'm not selling." He shifted his weight, and she noticed the way he moved, economical and deliberate, like a man who'd learned to conserve everything, even motion. "I'm offering a trade." That's when he explained it. The Homestead Act had been amended, offering larger parcels to married settlers willing to work virgin territory in Montana. Caleb had the land claim, the skill, and the determination. What he lacked was a wife. The law required one. "I need a woman willing to sign papers and accompany me north," he said plainly. "In exchange, I'll give you my horse, $50, and your cow." Emma blinked. "You want to buy Bessie?" "No, ma'am. I want to marry you for her." The absurdity should have offended her, should have sent her reaching for the rifle she kept by the door. Instead, Emma found herself considering it. What did she have here? A failing farm, a town that looked through her like glass, and another brutal winter approaching that she might not survive. "This would be a legal marriage," she said slowly. "On paper." "Yes, ma'am." "And after? When you have your land?" "We go our separate ways, if that's what you want." His eyes held hers. "I'm not asking for anything beyond what the law requires. Just a name on a document." Emma looked past him at Bessie, grazing peacefully in the small paddock. Then she looked at her hands, calloused and cracked from work that never ended. She thought of her empty house, her empty bed, her empty future. "When?" she asked. Something flickered in Caleb's expression. Relief, maybe. "Tomorrow, if you're willing. The judge in town can make it official. And if you were this woman, 43 years old, invisible to the world with winter coming and nothing but loneliness ahead, would you marry a stranger for survival? Would you take the chance that maybe, just maybe, something could be different?" Emma extended her hand. "Tomorrow, then." His hand engulfed hers, warm and rough and solid. The handshake lasted a moment longer than necessary, and when he released her, Emma felt the ghost of his touch like a brand. That night, she lay awake in her narrow bed, listening to Caleb bed down in the barn. She tried to tell herself this was just business, a transaction, nothing more, but her body, dormant for so long, whispered otherwise. The wedding took place in the judge's dusty office, witnessed by his clerk and the banker who held Emma's debt. She wore her only good dress, faded blue calico that had seen better days. Caleb wore a clean shirt, his hair still damp from washing. The ceremony lasted 5 minutes. Emma spoke her vows in a steady voice, watching her own hand as Caleb slid a simple gold band onto her finger. His hands trembled slightly, the first sign of uncertainty she'd seen in him. When the judge pronounced them married, Caleb looked at her with an expression she couldn't read. He didn't kiss her, didn't even touch her beyond that brief moment with the ring. "Mrs. Stone," he said quietly, and the name sounded strange in her ears. They collected their documents and left quickly, ignoring the stares from townsfolk who'd gathered outside to witness the spectacle of the widow marrying a stranger. Emma kept her chin high, but she felt their judgment like stones against her back. The ride back to her farm was silent. Caleb led his horse, Bessie trailing on a rope, while Emma sat in the wagon beside him. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose. "We'll leave in 3 days," Caleb said as they approached her house. "That gives me time to prepare the wagon and you time to pack what you want to bring." Emma nodded. 3 days. 3 days until she left the only home she'd known, traveling north with a man she'd spoken perhaps 24 words to. He helped her down from the wagon, his hands spanning her waist easily. For a moment they stood close enough that she could smell the clean scent of soap and leather on him, could see the fine lines around his eyes that spoke of years squinting into harsh sun. "Thank you," he said, and there was sincerity in it. "I know this isn't what you probably dreamed of." Emma surprised herself by smiling, small and sad. "Mr. Stone, I stopped dreaming a long time ago." Something shifted in his face then, a softening she hadn't expected. "Caleb," he said. "You should call me Caleb." "Caleb," she repeated, and the name felt intimate on her tongue. "And you should call me Emma." He nodded slowly. "Emma." They stood there as darkness gathered, neither moving, the space between them charged with something neither acknowledged. Then Caleb stepped back, breaking the spell. "I'll see to the animals," he said. "You should get inside. It's getting cold." Emma watched him lead Bessie toward the barn, his broad back disappearing into shadow. She turned toward the house, her new ring catching the last light of day. Inside, she prepared a simple supper of beans and cornbread. When Caleb didn't come in, she fixed him a plate and carried it to the barn. She found him brushing down his horse with long, methodical strokes, his shirt sleeves rolled up to reveal forearms corded with muscle. "I brought you supper," she said from the doorway. He turned, surprise crossing his features. "You didn't have to do that." "We're married now," she said simply. "Even if it's just on paper, we should eat together." Caleb set down the brush and took the plate from her. Their fingers touched briefly, and Emma felt that same jolt she'd experienced at the wedding. His eyes met hers, and she saw her own confusion reflected there. "Join me?" he asked, gesturing to a hay bale. They sat in the dim barn, the sounds of the animals settling for the night around them, and ate in companionable silence. Emma found herself stealing glances at him, noting the way he ate carefully, without haste, the way his hands cradled the tin plate with unexpected gentleness. "Where are you from originally?" she asked, breaking the quiet. "Kentucky," he said. "Left when I was 16, been moving west ever since. Family, all gone." He said it without emotion, but Emma heard the weight beneath the words. "You?" "Same." She looked down at her hands. "My husband's family blamed me when we had no children. After he died, they made it clear I wasn't welcome." Caleb was quiet for a moment. "They're failing, not yours." The simple statement, delivered with such certainty, brought an unexpected sting to Emma's eyes. She blinked rapidly, refusing to let tears fall. "Thank you for saying that," she whispered. He set his empty plate aside and leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "Emma, I want you to understand something. This arrangement, it's legal and binding, but you don't owe me anything beyond what we agreed. When we get to Montana, you'll have your own space, your own life. I meant what I said." She should have felt relieved. Instead, she felt a strange disappointment. "I understand. But," he continued, his voice dropping lower, "if you ever want something different, You only have to say. Emma's breath caught. She looked at him, really looked at him, and saw a man as lonely as herself. A man who'd learned to survive alone, but maybe, just maybe, was tired of it. "And you?" she asked, her voice barely audible. "What do you want?" Caleb's jaw tightened. He stared at her for a long moment, and Emma saw the war in his eyes, desire battling with honor. Finally, he stood, putting distance between them. "Doesn't matter what I want," he said roughly. "I gave you my word." He turned away, busying himself with the horse's tack, his movements suddenly sharp. Emma stood slowly, understanding that she'd touched something raw in him. "Good night, Caleb," she said softly. "Good night, Emma." She walked back to the house, her heart pounding. Inside, she moved through her evening routine mechanically, banking the fire, checking the locks, preparing for bed. But when she reached her bedroom, she paused. The house had never felt so empty. The bed had never looked so wide and cold. Emma changed into her nightgown and braided her hair with shaking hands. She could see the barn from her window, a sliver of lantern light visible through the cracks in the wood. Caleb was there, just yards away, yet the distance felt vast. She thought about what he'd said. "If you ever want something different, you only have to say." Did she want something different? She barely knew this man. The practical part of her mind insisted this was insane, that she should maintain the boundaries they'd agreed upon, that mixing business with anything else was foolish. But another part of her, the part that had been silent for so long, whispered different counsel. She was 43 years old. She'd spent 7 years alone, before that years in a loveless marriage to a man who'd seen her as a vessel for children she couldn't provide. She'd lived her entire life by rules that had given her nothing but sorrow. What if, just once, she chose differently? Emma's hands went to the buttons of her nightgown, then stopped. No, not like that. If she was going to do this, it had to be honest. Real. She pulled on her robe and walked through the dark house to the front door. Her hand rested on the lock for a long moment. Then she turned it. The click echoed in the silence. Emma returned to the kitchen and sat at the table, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might break through her ribs. She didn't know if he would come, didn't know what she would say if he did. Minutes passed like hours. The fire crackled. The old house creaked and settled. Then she heard boots on the porch steps. The door handle turned. Caleb stepped inside, still in his work clothes, his hair mussed. He looked at her, sitting there in the lamplight, and his expression was almost pained. "Emma," he said, her name a question and a warning. She stood slowly, pulling her robe tighter. "I locked the door," she said simply. "I noticed." He didn't move from the threshold. "Why?" "Because I'm tired of being alone," she said, and the honesty of it nearly broke her. "Because tomorrow we'll be on the road, and then we'll be in Montana, and everything will be about survival and practicality and maintaining proper distance. But tonight, we're here, and I don't want to be alone tonight." Caleb closed the door behind him carefully. He crossed the room with slow, measured steps until he stood before her. This close, she had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. "I don't want to take advantage," he said, his voice rough. "You're vulnerable, and this situation, it's not—" "I'm choosing," Emma interrupted. "Maybe for the first time in my life, I'm choosing what I want instead of what's expected or proper or safe." His hands came up, hovering near her shoulders but not quite touching. "And what do you want?" Emma reached up and placed her palm against his chest, feeling his heart racing beneath her fingers. To remember what it feels like to be wanted, to be touched, to be something other than invisible. Caleb's breath came out ragged. His hands finally settled on her shoulders, warm and heavy and grounding. "Emma, you're not invisible. You're—" He trailed off, searching for words. "You're the bravest woman I've ever met." She laughed softly, sadly. "Marrying a stranger for a cow isn't brave. It's desperate." "No," he said firmly. "Surviving 7 years alone, keeping this place running, holding your head high when the whole town judges you, that's brave. Saying yes to an uncertain future instead of waiting to die here, That's brave. Standing here now, asking for what you need, that's the bravest thing of all. Tears spilled down Emma's cheeks then, and she didn't wipe them away. Caleb's thumb brushed them gently, his touch achingly tender for such a large man. "I don't know how to do this," she whispered. "It's been so long, and I was never good at it even then, and—" "Shh!" He pulled her closer, wrapping his arms around her. Emma pressed her face against his chest, breathing in the scent of him, feeling the solid warmth of his body against hers. "We don't have to do anything. We can just stand here. That's enough." But it wasn't enough. Not for Emma. Not anymore. She pulled back slightly and looked up at him. "Caleb, I need you to understand. I'm not asking you to love me. I'm not asking for promises or pretty words. I'm just asking you not to leave me alone tonight." Something in his expression cracked then, the careful control he'd maintained falling away. "Emma, if I stay, if we do this, it's going to change things. The agreement we made was about survival," she finished. "And maybe I need this to survive too. Maybe I need to remember that I'm alive, that I can still feel something other than loneliness." Caleb's forehead dropped to rest against hers. She felt him trembling, felt the tension in every line of his body. "I haven't been with anyone in years," he admitted quietly. "I'm not sure I remember how to be gentle. Then we'll figure it out together." He pulled back just enough to cup her face in his hands, tilting her head up. His eyes searched hers, looking for doubt, for hesitation. Emma held his gaze steadily, letting him see her certainty. "You're sure?" he asked one last time. Instead of answering with words, Emma rose on her toes and pressed her lips to his. The kiss was tentative at first, almost shy. Two people who'd forgotten how to be anything but alone, learning the shape of each other's mouths. But then Caleb made a sound low in his throat, and his arms tightened around her, and the kiss deepened into something urgent and necessary. Emma's hands fisted in his shirt, pulling him closer, needing more contact, more warmth, more proof that she was real and alive and desired. Caleb responded by lifting her, his strength effortless, and she wrapped her legs around his waist instinctively. He carried her toward the bedroom, his mouth never leaving hers, his hands supporting her weight with ease. Emma felt dizzy with sensation, with the newness of being held, of being wanted. When he laid her on the bed and followed her down, his weight settling over her, she gasped at the feeling of being covered, surrounded, protected. "Emma," he breathed against her neck, his lips trailing along her pulse point. "Tell me if you want me to stop." "Don't stop," she whispered. "Please don't stop." His hands found the tie of her robe, and she helped him push it aside, then reached for the buttons of his shirt. They undressed each other slowly, with trembling hands and sharp intakes of breath, revealing bodies marked by hard work and harder years. Emma saw the scars on Caleb's torso, the evidence of a violent past he'd never spoken of. He saw the marks on her hands, the calluses and burns from keeping herself alive alone. Neither looked away, neither judged. When skin met skin, Emma closed her eyes against the overwhelming rush of feeling. It had been so long, so terribly long, since she'd been touched with anything resembling tenderness. Caleb's hands moved over her with reverent slowness, learning her shape, her responses, the sounds she made when he found sensitive places. "You're beautiful," he murmured against her shoulder, and Emma wanted to protest, to list all the ways she wasn't, but the sincerity in his voice silenced her. She explored him in turn, marveling at the hard planes of muscle, the heat of his skin, the way he shuddered when her fingers traced certain paths. They moved together without haste, relearning pleasure, rediscovering connection. When Caleb finally moved inside her, Emma's back arched, and she gripped his shoulders hard enough to leave marks. The sensation was almost too much, too intense after years of numbness. But Caleb held still, giving her time to adjust, his own breathing ragged against her ear. "Okay?" he managed. "Yes," she gasped. "Yes." They found a rhythm that was gentle at first, then gradually building, bodies remembering what minds had tried to forget. Emma felt something breaking open inside her, some frozen place that had been locked away for too long. She heard herself making sounds she didn't recognize, speaking words that made no sense. Caleb's hand found hers, threading their fingers together, and that simple gesture of intimacy undid her completely. The pleasure that rolled through her was almost secondary to the overwhelming relief of not being alone, of being connected to another human being, of being allowed to feel. When Caleb followed her over the edge, his face buried in her neck, her name on his lips, Emma held him tight and let herself cry. Great, wrenching sobs that had nothing to do with sadness and everything to do with release. He didn't pull away, didn't make it awkward. He simply rolled to his side and gathered her against his chest, one large hand stroking her hair while she shook apart and slowly pieced herself back together. "I'm sorry," she finally whispered. "I don't know why I'm—" "Don't apologize," Caleb said firmly. "Never apologize for feeling." They lay tangled together as the lamp burned low, neither speaking, neither willing to break the fragile peace that had settled over them. Emma traced idle patterns on Caleb's chest, and he played with strands of her hair, and it felt almost normal, almost like they were a real married couple instead of two desperate people who'd made a bargain. "What are you thinking?" Caleb asked eventually. Emma considered lying, then decided against it. "That I don't know how to do this. Be with someone. I was married for 15 years, but I'm not sure I was ever really with my husband, not like this." Caleb was quiet for a moment. "My wife died in childbirth," he said finally. 12 years ago. The baby died too. After that, I just kept moving. Figured if I didn't stay anywhere long enough, I wouldn't get attached, wouldn't have to lose anything again." Emma tilted her head to look at him. "Is that why you wanted a marriage on paper? So you wouldn't get attached?" "Maybe." His arms tightened around her. "Seems like that plan's not working out so well." She smiled against his chest. "No, no." He pressed a kiss to the top of her head. "Emma, I need you to understand. What happened tonight? It doesn't have to change our agreement. When we get to Montana, if you still want your own space, your own life, I'll respect that. But I need you to know that if you wanted different, if you wanted this to be real, I'd want that too." Emma's heart stuttered. She pushed up on one elbow to look at him properly. "You barely know me. I know you're strong. I know you're brave. I know you've survived things that would have broken most people." His hand came up to cup her cheek. "I know that kissing you feels more right than anything has in a dozen years. Caleb, you don't have to decide anything now," he said quickly. "We have time. We have the whole journey north. I just needed you to know that I'm not using you. This isn't just about the land for me anymore." Emma studied his face in the dim light, seeing honesty there and want, and something that looked almost like hope. It terrified her. It also made her feel more alive than she had in years. "Ask me again in Montana," she said softly. "When we're there, when we see what life could actually be like, ask me then what I want." "I will," he promised. They fell asleep that way, wrapped around each other, and for the first time in longer than Emma could remember, she didn't dream of being alone. She woke to pale dawn light and the smell of coffee. Caleb was already up, dressed, moving quietly around the kitchen. Emma lay still for a moment, processing the night before, half convinced she'd imagined it. But no, her body remembered. The pleasant ache in her muscles, the tender places where his mouth had been, the feeling of being thoroughly loved. It was all real. She rose and dressed quickly, braiding her hair and splashing cold water on her face. When she emerged from the bedroom, Caleb looked up from the stove with an expression that was almost shy. "Morning," he said. "Morning." They stood looking at each other across the small kitchen, and Emma wondered if things would be awkward now, if they'd ruined the simple partnership they'd agreed to. Then Caleb smiled, small and genuine, and held out a cup of coffee. "Figured we have a lot of packing to do today," he said. "Thought you might need this." Emma took the cup, their fingers brushing, and felt relief wash through her. Whatever this was between them, it didn't have to be complicated. Not yet. Thank you, she said. They spent the day preparing for the journey. Caleb worked on the wagon, while Emma sorted through her possessions, deciding what to bring and what to leave behind. It should have been heartbreaking, abandoning her home, but instead Emma felt oddly light. She was leaving behind the ghost of who she'd been expected to be and stepping into an unknown future. It was terrifying. It was exhilarating. That evening, as they shared another simple meal, Emma found herself watching Caleb, noticing small things. The way he listened when she spoke, giving her his full attention. The way he'd fixed the wobbly table leg without being asked. The gentle way he'd handled Bessie when loading her into the stock pen. "What?" he asked, catching her staring. "Nothing," she smiled. "Just thinking that maybe marrying a stranger for a cow wasn't the craziest thing I've ever done." "No? No." She reached across the table and took his hand. Maybe it was the smartest. Caleb's fingers tightened around hers. "We leave at dawn," he said quietly. "Last chance to change your mind." "I'm not changing my mind." That night, when Caleb started to head to the barn, Emma stopped him with a hand on his arm. He looked at her questioningly. "Stay," she said simply. He did. They made love again. Slower this time, learning each other more thoroughly. Afterward, Emma lay with her head on Caleb's chest, listening to his heartbeat steady beneath her ear. "Tell me about Montana," she said. So he did, painting pictures with words of mountains that touched the sky, of valleys rich with grass, of rivers so clear you could see every stone on the bottom. He told her about the cabin he planned to build, the life he wanted to make. "Sounds like paradise," Emma murmured. "Could be," Caleb said, "if you're there." Emma closed her eyes, letting herself imagine it. A real home, a real partner, a real chance at happiness. Maybe, just maybe, it wasn't too late for her after all. The next morning dawned clear and cold. Emma stood on her porch watching as Caleb made the final preparations to the wagon. Everything she owned was packed into 2 trunks and a few boxes. It seemed impossibly small, the sum of 43 years of life. The banker arrived as they were about to leave, papers in hand. Emma signed away her property for a pittance, barely enough to clear her debts. She handed over the keys to her house without looking back. Caleb helped her up onto the wagon seat, his hands steady on her waist. When he settled beside her and took up the reins, Emma felt a flutter of nerves. "Ready?" he asked. She looked at the house one last time, then at the road stretching north toward an uncertain future. She thought about the woman she'd been a week ago, alone and hopeless, and the woman she was now, sitting beside her husband. "Ready?" she said. The wagon lurched forward. Bessie lowed softly from her tether behind them, and Emma Hartwell Stone began the journey toward a life she'd never dared to dream of. The first days on the road were harder than Emma had anticipated. The wagon seat was unforgiving, the pace relentless, and the October cold seeped into her bones. But Caleb was patient, stopping often to let her stretch, sharing his coat when the wind picked up, making camp early when he saw her flagging. They fell into an easy rhythm. During the day, they talked, really talked, sharing stories from their pasts, learning each other's history. Emma told him about growing up as the youngest of 6, about watching her siblings marry and scatter, about her parents' disappointment when she wed a man they considered beneath her. Caleb shared his own story, about leaving Kentucky after his father drank himself to death, about wandering west and finding work wherever he could, about the wife he'd loved and lost, and the years of hollow drifting that followed. "You could have remarried," Emma said one afternoon, as they crossed an endless stretch of prairie. "A man like you, strong, capable. There must have been women interested." Caleb was quiet for a long moment. "Never felt right," he said finally. "Felt like I'd be betraying Sarah's memory, or maybe I was just too scared to care about someone again, knowing I could lose them." "And now?" Emma asked softly. He glanced at her, his grey eyes serious. "Now I think I was half dead all those years, just going through motions. Then I met you, and it was like waking up." Emma's throat tightened. I know what you mean. At night, they made camp and shared a bedroll under the vast western sky. Sometimes they made love, slow and tender. Sometimes they simply held each other, talking quietly until sleep claimed them, and sometimes they lay in silence, fingers intertwined, watching stars wheel overhead. Emma found herself opening in ways she hadn't known were possible. With Caleb, she could be honest about her fears, her disappointments, the secret shame she'd carried about her childlessness. He never judged, never offered empty platitudes. He simply listened and held her, and made her feel valued for who she was, not what she could or couldn't provide. One evening, about 2 weeks into the journey, they camped beside a creek. Emma was washing dishes when Caleb called out sharply. She turned to see him standing rigid, his hand on the rifle he kept in the wagon. 3 men on horseback had appeared on the ridge above them. Emma's heart seized. They were miles from any town, utterly alone. She moved quickly to Caleb's side. "Evening," one of the riders called down. He was lean and dark, with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "That's a fine wagon you got there." "We're just passing through," Caleb said evenly. "Don't want any trouble." "No trouble," the man said, urging his horse down the slope. His companions followed. "Just wondering if you might be willing to trade. We've been riding hard and our supplies are running low." Emma could smell the lie. These weren't desperate travelers. They were predators who'd spotted easy prey. Caleb must have sensed it too because his body tensed. "Got nothing to spare," he said. "Best move along." The leader's smile vanished. "That wasn't a request, friend." Everything happened fast then. The man on the left went for his gun. Caleb's rifle came up in one smooth motion, and the crack of the shot echoed across the prairie. The would-be thief dropped from his saddle with a scream, clutching his shoulder. The other 2 wheeled their horses, the leader cursing viciously. "You'll regret that," he shouted. But they were already galloping away, hauling their wounded companion between them. Caleb kept the rifle up until they disappeared over the ridge. Then he lowered it slowly, his jaw tight. "Emma, get in the wagon. We're moving camp." They traveled through the night, putting miles between themselves and the attack site. Emma's hands shook as she clung to the wagon seat, adrenaline making her dizzy. When Caleb finally stopped in a dense stand of cottonwoods, she practically fell from the wagon. He caught her, steadying her. "You all right?" "I think so." She looked up at him. "You could have killed that man." "I could have," Caleb agreed. "Probably should have. But I didn't want you to see that, unless I had to." Emma touched his face, feeling the tension in his jaw. "Thank you for protecting us." Something in his expression softened. He pulled her close, burying his face in her hair. "Emma, I need you to understand something. I've done hard things, violent things. I'm not a good man." She pulled back to look at him. "You're wrong. You're the best man I know." They made camp there, hidden in the trees. Caleb built a small, smokeless fire, and they ate cold food, speaking in whispers. When they finally bedded down, Emma couldn't sleep. Every sound made her jump. Caleb gathered her against his chest, his arms a solid wall around her. "I've got you," he murmured. "Nothing's going to hurt you while I'm here." Emma believed him, and tucked against his warmth, she finally slept. The next week passed without incident. They crossed into Wyoming territory, the landscape growing more rugged, mountains appearing on the horizon like distant promises. Emma found herself relaxing, even enjoying the journey. The world was so much bigger than her small farm had been, and she was seeing it with someone who made her feel alive. One afternoon, they stopped in a small settlement to resupply. While Caleb dealt with the merchant, Emma wandered to the general store. A woman about her age was examining fabric, and she looked up when Emma entered. "New to town?" she asked pleasantly. "Just passing through," Emma said. "Heading to Montana with my husband." The word still felt strange on her tongue, but also right. "Montana!" The woman's eyes widened. "That's wild country up there. Lonely too. You must be brave." Emma thought about that. Was she brave, or just desperate enough to try for something different? Maybe just tired of being afraid, she said. The woman studied her with sudden understanding. I know that feeling. I came west 5 years ago after my husband died back in Missouri. Everyone said I was crazy, that I'd fail. But I made it work. She extended her hand. Sarah Mitchell, Emma Stone. They talked for a while, Sarah giving Emma advice about surviving the frontier, about building a life in wild places. When Caleb came to find her, Sarah looked him up and down appraisingly. You take care of her, she said sternly. Good women are rare out here. Caleb's hand found Emma's back, warm and possessive. Yes, ma'am. I intend to. As they left the settlement, Emma felt buoyed by the encounter. Maybe there was a place for her in this new world. Maybe she could build something that mattered. That night, camped under a sky brilliant with stars, Caleb taught her the constellations. He lay on his back in their bedroll, Emma tucked against his side, and pointed out patterns in the chaos. There's Cassiopeia, he said, and Orion. That bright one is Venus. Emma listened to his deep voice rumbling through his chest, feeling safer than she had in years. How do you know all this? Had a lot of lonely nights, he said quietly. The stars were my only company for a long time. Emma propped herself up on one elbow to look at him. In the moonlight, his features were softer, younger somehow. Are you still lonely? She asked. Caleb's hand came up to cup her cheek. No, he said simply. Not anymore. He pulled her down for a kiss that was tender at first, then deepening into something more urgent. Emma responded with equal need, her body already learning the language of his touch. They made love under the stars, slow and thorough, taking their time because they could, because there was no rush, because this was becoming something neither had expected. Afterward, Emma lay sprawled across Caleb's chest, boneless and content. Tell me something true, she murmured. What do you want to know? Anything. Something about you that no one else knows. Caleb was silent for so long, Emma thought he wouldn't answer. Then he said quietly, I'm scared. She lifted her head in surprise. Of what? Of this being temporary, of getting to Montana and you realizing you don't need me, of losing you after I've just found you. His hand stroked through her hair. I haven't let myself care about anything in 12 years, Emma. It's terrifying. Emma's eyes stung. She pressed a kiss over his heart. I'm scared too, she admitted. I'm scared I'm not enough, that I'll disappoint you like I disappointed everyone else. You could never let me finish. She took a shaky breath. I'm scared that this is too good to last, that I'll wake up one day and it'll all have been a dream. But Caleb, I'm more scared of not trying. I spent 7 years being afraid, being small, being invisible. I don't want to be that person anymore. Caleb rolled them over so he was above her, his weight pressing her into the bedroll, his eyes searching hers in the darkness. Then let's make a new agreement. Right here. Right now. What kind of agreement? We try, he said firmly. We get to Montana, we build that cabin, we make a life together. Not because a piece of paper says we're married, but because we choose it. Every day, we choose each other. Emma felt tears slip from the corners of her eyes. And if it doesn't work, then at least we tried, Caleb said. At least we were brave enough to want something. But Emma, I don't think it's going to fail. I think we're going to build something good. She pulled him down for a kiss that tasted of salt and hope. Then yes, she whispered against his mouth, let's try. They sealed the agreement with their bodies, with whispered promises and shared breath, with a joining that felt like coming home. And when Emma finally slept, wrapped in Caleb's arms, she dreamed not of her past, but of mountains and clear rivers, and a future that glittered with possibility. The last leg of the journey tested them. They crossed into Montana as the weather turned, early snow dusting the high passes. The going was slow, treacherous, and Emma often found herself gripping the wagon seat with white knuckles as they navigated narrow mountain roads. But Caleb was steady, his skill with the team evident in every careful maneuver, and when Emma's nerve threatened to fail, he would reach over and squeeze her hand, his touch grounding her. Almost there, he'd say. Just a little further. Finally, 3 weeks after leaving Emma's farm, they crested a ridge and Caleb pulled the wagon to a stop. Before them spread a valley so beautiful it stole Emma's breath. Mountains ringed it on 3 sides, their peaks white with new snow. A river cut through the center, the water so clear it reflected the sky like glass. And the grass, even in late October, was thick and rich. "There," Caleb said, his voice rough with emotion. "That's ours. All of it." Emma stared, unable to speak. It was wild and empty and perfect. She could see it all in her mind's eye, the cabin they would build, the garden she would plant, the life they could make. "It's beautiful," she finally managed. Caleb turned to her, and Emma saw tears on his weathered cheeks. "You're sure?" he asked. "This is going to be hard, harder than anything you've done before. It's not too late to change your mind." Emma took his face in her hands and kissed him, pouring everything she felt into it, all her hope and fear and determination. When she pulled back, she was smiling. "I'm sure," she said. "Let's go home." They descended into the valley as the sun set, painting the mountains in shades of rose and gold. Caleb drove the wagon to a sheltered spot near the river, where cottonwoods offered protection from the wind. He helped Emma down, and they stood together, surveying their new kingdom. "We'll start with a shelter," Caleb said, already planning. "Something to get us through winter. Then in spring, we'll build proper." Emma nodded, but she wasn't really listening. She was watching Caleb's face, seeing the life returning to him, the hope replacing the weariness. This was what he needed, she realized. Not just land, but purpose, a reason to build instead of drift. "Caleb," she said softly. He looked down at her. "Yeah? Thank you for choosing me." His arms came around her, holding her tight. "Emma, I'd choose you 1,000 times over. In every lifetime, I'd choose you." They kissed there in the twilight, in the valley that would become their home, and Emma felt something settle deep in her chest. This was right. This was where she was meant to be. That night, they made camp for what Caleb promised was the last time. Tomorrow, he said, they'd start building. Tomorrow, their real life would begin. But tonight, they had each other and the stars, and the promise of a future that was finally wonderfully theirs. Emma fell asleep in Caleb's arms, listening to the river song, and for the first time in longer than she could remember, she felt complete. The weeks that followed were brutal. Caleb worked from dawn to dusk, felling trees and hauling logs, building the shelter that would see them through winter. Emma worked beside him when she could, chinking gaps with mud and moss, helping to raise the heavy beams, her muscles screaming in protest. At night, they collapsed together in the wagon bed, too exhausted even for conversation. But Caleb always found energy to hold her, to press a kiss to her temple, to murmur that they were going to make it. Slowly, the shelter took shape. It was rough, just one room with a dirt floor and a stone fireplace, but it was solid. It was shelter. It was theirs. The day they moved in, Emma stood in the center of the small space and cried. Caleb immediately gathered her up, alarmed. "What's wrong? Is it not enough? I know it's rough, but come spring—" "It's perfect," Emma said through her tears. "It's absolutely perfect." She looked up at him, this man who'd married her for a cow, who'd carried her across mountains, who'd built her a home with his own 2 hands. And she knew, with sudden, brilliant clarity, that she loved him. It should have terrified her, this swift, deep feeling. Instead, it filled her with joy. "Caleb," she said, her voice steady despite the tears. "I love you." He went very still. Then his face transformed, wonder and relief and happiness chasing across his features. He lifted her off her feet, spinning her around in the small space. "Say it again," he demanded. Emma laughed, clutching his shoulders. "I love you." Again. "I love you, Caleb Stone." He set her down and kissed her with such tenderness that Emma's knees went weak. When he finally pulled back, he rested his forehead against hers. "I love you too," he said, his voice breaking. "God, Emma, I love you so much." They stood there in their rough cabin, holding each other, and Emma thought about the journey that had brought them here. A desperate bargain. A marriage on paper, a locked door, and a choice made in darkness. All of it had led to this moment, to love, to home, to belonging. That night, they christened their new home properly, making love on a mattress stuffed with prairie grass, the fire casting dancing shadows on the log walls. And as Emma moved with Caleb, as pleasure built and broke and built again, she understood that she'd been reborn. The woman who'd married a stranger for survival was gone. In her place was someone stronger, someone loved, someone home. Winter came hard and fast. Snow piled high around their little cabin, and temperatures plunged. But inside, warmed by Caleb's fire and his body, Emma found a contentment she'd never imagined possible. They spent the long winter nights talking, planning, dreaming. Caleb taught her to read his surveyor's maps. Emma taught him the songs her mother used to sing. They played cards by firelight and told each other stories and made love until they were both breathless and laughing. When spring finally came, thawing the frozen valley, they began building their real home. This time, Emma worked as a full partner, her hands growing stronger, her body adapting to the constant labor. And as the cabin rose, log by log, she felt her own foundation growing stronger too. One evening in late April, as they sat on the porch of their nearly finished cabin, watching the sun set over the mountains, Caleb took her hand. "We made it," he said simply. Emma squeezed his fingers. "We did. No regrets?" She thought about her old life, the farm, the loneliness, the version of herself who'd accepted a stranger's proposal out of desperation. Then she looked at the home they'd built, the life they were creating, the man beside her who'd become her whole world. "Not a single one," she said. Caleb pulled her closer, and Emma rested her head on his shoulder, breathing in the scent of sawdust and pine and him. Behind them, Bessie lowed softly in her new pen, a reminder of where they'd started. A giant cowboy had married a stranger for a cow. That night she'd locked the door, and in doing so, she'd unlocked a future neither of them could have dreamed of. Sometimes the best things in life start with desperation. Sometimes you have to risk everything on a stranger. Sometimes you have to be brave enough to lock the door and see what happens. For Emma and Caleb, what happened was love. What happened was home. What happened was everything they'd both stopped believing in, and it all began with a cow, a locked door, and two lonely people willing to take a chance on each other.